Hi, hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Skye, and today I'm going to be showing you guys my eyeshadow palette collection. I like to do these videos once or twice a year, so I thought it's about time that I do my 2021 updated palette collection. Now, I will be mentioning which palettes were sent to me in PR because a small handful were, but the majority of my palettes are from indie brands, and yeah, let's get on into the video. I'm so excited, I love filming these. I'm gonna start off with my smallest palettes, and this one is the Copacetic Lunar Quad. This is a palette of Copacetic's flaky formula. They do have a few of these quads, but this one was gifted to me from a friend. I'm still testing this out, but this is such a unique formula. I love these two shades especially. They're so gorgeous. I still have to figure out my final thoughts on these, but this is a very unique formula, very interesting and pretty. Next palette is the Fenty Beauty No. 7 palette. This is the No. 7 Cadet. Looks like this. This is so hard to open. I hate plastic packaging. This is what she looks like. It's a really nice grungy little neutral palette, and I really do like the size of it. It's nice and small. I love this mustard shade so much. It's a lovely little capsule palette. The formula isn't anything out of this world. I think indie formulas just do it better. And even for mainstream, I mean, this is a good formula, but it's not like revolutionary, if you know what I mean. Let's move on to my Melt palettes, the first one being the Melt Radioactive palette. This is a bright rainbow palette, and I really love these shades right here. I know that these were in the original Radioactive stack, and they are very nice. Most of these do have a sheen in them. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it on camera. If I had it my way, these would all be proper mattes. These two shades are awful, I have to say. Like, they're just crusty and dusty. But this is a really fun bright matte palette. I don't recommend Melt palettes full price. I just think I don't really like Melt anymore. They're very inconsistent with their eyeshadow formulas. I find that they're far too expensive for what the formula actually is. Even if you get the good formulas from them, they're not really worth like the nearly £60 price tag. The other Melt palette I own is the Millennial Pinks palette. I got this for my birthday last year from my mum, and while I do enjoy the matte formula in here, most of these shimmers are just not it. Specifically this one, and this one, they're not that great. They're very crumbly, they don't like to stick to the eye, and they're not shiny at all. The only good metallics are these two right here, and even then I've got metallics that are better, but I still like to hold on to this one. It's a cute pink palette, but definitely not the best pink palette out there. Continuing on with the pink theme, we have my favorite pink palette. This is the Natasha Denona Love palette. I got this as a gift from one of my good friends, Kat. Mine looks a little bit different because I did rearrange it because these pans are magnetic and there's little holes at the back that you can poke your shadows out of. I'll probably put this back to the way it looked originally, but I just wanted to see how it all looked in a nice gradient. And this is such a phenomenal palette. I love the mattes in here, very pigmented and blendable. I really do love the shimmer formula in here. There's a mix of different types, like some of them are more high shine, like this one, and this one. There are two cream to powder mattes in here, which I'm not a big fan of. They're not as pigmented, you do have to build them up a bit more, but they just look a little bit dull compared to the regular matte formula. This palette is gorgeous. This is one of my favorite palettes in my collection. However, I do recommend getting this palette or any of Natasha Denona's palettes on sale, because in my personal opinion, for me personally, I just think that £60 is too much to spend on an eyeshadow palette. Even though I love this, I just think it's too much money for me. This next palette is the Ace Beauté Blossom Passion palette. One of my friends, Natalia, she saw this on sale on Beauty Bay for literally like £5, and I think it was a weird glitch, but she managed to grab this for £5 and asked if I wanted it, so I happily said yes. And this is a beautiful monochromatic pink palette, but it has different tones of pink. Like, you've got cool toned pinks, reds, corals, and light dusty pinks too. I really enjoy this palette quite a lot. It's very pretty. I still want to test it out a little bit more because I haven't used all of the shades in this palette, but I do like it. I think Ace Beauté's formula is pretty damn good. Not my favorite, but it's pretty good. Continuing with the theme of Ace Beauté, we have the Flare palette. My mom got this for me for Christmas last year, and man, this is so fucking nice. I think this formula is better than the Blossom Passion palette. Metallics in here are much more high shine. They're still not super sparkly, like Kaleidos' shimmers, but they are still very nice, and I love the color story in here, that it's kind of grungy and bright at the same time. It's such a fun palette to play with. I cannot wait to do a 3 looks 1 palette plus review video with this one, because the looks you can do are pretty much endless. By the way, I am working on doing a 3 looks 1 palette plus review video with all of the palettes in my collection, and I do have a playlist that I will link down below. If there's a palette that you see in my collection that you want me to do a 3 looks 1 palette video with sooner, then let me know in the comments, because I'll definitely see if I can get those up sooner, the ones that are more requested. I think we're gonna stick with the grungy theme, and this next palette is the Lunar Beauty Moonspell palette. This is just beautiful. This is a work of art. Oh my goodness. And this is what the inside looks like. This is so hard to show on camera because of the reflective background. I'm very impressed with Lunar Beauty's formula, both for their metallic shadows and their mattes. So creamy and pigmented and blendable, just everything I want in an eyeshadow. This shade Brew right here is fucking incredible. Same with these two here. Their mattes especially are so good. I really want to try more of Lunar Beauty's palettes. I have my eye on the Strawberry Dream palette, but I mean, you saw my pink palettes. I clearly do not need any more pink. This color story here is pretty unique, and if you're a grungy, colorful lover, then this palette is a must-have in my opinion. Next up is one of the newer palettes in my collection. This is the Black Moon Urban Myth palette. I remember they launched this palette around October last year, and the moment that I saw it, I knew that I needed it. This color story is so pretty and unique. I especially love these two shimmers up here. They're so textured and reflective. The mattes in here are very nice. These two right here are a little bit harder to work with. They're a bit drier. The mirror is a little UFO. I love the theming of this and the packaging. It's so cute. And the color story is pretty unique in my opinion. I enjoy this one quite a bit. I'm trying to show you palettes in groupings. So the next one is the Shroud Arcana palette. This palette is a beautiful, grungy, colorful lover's dream. It's a bit more muted than Lunar Beauty Moonspell. I like the matte formula in here a lot. Shroud's matte formula is so fucking nice. These shimmers though aren't super high shine, they're more just a standard metallic, but this shade Chalice is... it's so pretty. I love it so much. These kind of antique gold shades are some of my favorites to wear, and I love that this palette has a matte and shimmer that correspond with each other. It's really satisfying to look at and use. And my other Shroud palette is my baby. This is the Creepy Cute palette. This is the best pastel palette. There, I said it. The formula is so blendable, very saturated and pigmented. I feel like these pastels could work for a multitude of different skin tones because of how much depth there is to them. Like, they're still pastel, but they are more bright. So I do think that these tones would work for a lot of people. I especially love Take a Hint and Creep It Real. Like, these two colors I am obsessed with. It's such a fun little palette. I love the packaging. It's just such a cute little palette. My other favorite pastel palette, this is the Fun Size palette by Sugarpill. God, I have such a love affair with this palette. I have a cult surrounding this one. Even though this palette is so small and compact, it packs such a punch. These colors are so vibrant and intense on the eyes. 8-bit especially is such a beautiful periwinkle color, and all the names are gaming themed, and I mean, come on. I fucking... everything about this palette is perfect. The only thing I could change about this palette is maybe swap out this shade for an iridescent inner corner shade. But other than that, this is the perfect little pastel neon rainbow palette. Sticking with the rainbow bullshit, this is the Clarisike Sykes Box palette. My friend Kat also got this one for me for my birthday this year. I'm quite impressed with Clarisike's formula. It's more buildable rather than super pigmented right off the bat. I mean, some of these shades are more pigmented, like this red is a bright bitch. But since these are buildable, you can make them more pastel or more bright. You have a lot of control with these. The only color that I dislike in this palette is this pink. It just blends into my skin tone. This is a fun little rainbow palette. I love these blues as well. Like, these tones are so pretty. And this little mauvey purpley color is very unique. I don't think I have anything else like it in my collection. It's a solid little palette. I'm actually very intrigued by Clarisike's other palette. I think it's called Real Fantasy. That one is really beautiful. I mean, I do not need it since I already own Lunar Beauty Moonspell, and I feel like those color stories are quite similar. This is the Glamlight Cake palette, the only Glamlight palette in my collection. If you want rainbow brights that pack a punch, this is the palette for you. It's so bright and intense, really inspiring to look at. The metallics in here are so high shine and foiled. The mattes are super easy to work with. I love how pigmented they are, and they're so much fun and so saturated. I really want to try more of Glamlight's palettes, but I feel like all they do is rainbow palettes essentially, and I'm a bit like, okay, I've got enough rainbow palettes, I don't need any more, but this palette is fantastic. My mum also got this palette for me for Christmas because she saw this palette and was so impressed with it. She was like, you need that palette, so thanks, mum. This next palette is the September Rose Brew palette. This is such a solid neutral palette. Like, this is a fun neutral palette to me. The only downside is I feel like some of these shades are a little bit repetitive, and I wish that they were more metallics, because September Rose's metallic formula, like, these are textured. They are high shine and so pretty. September Rose are a black-owned indie brand. Oh, I forgot to mention, Ace Beauté is also black-owned. And September Rose are also based in the UK, which is where I live, so it's a local brand to me. Their matte formula is really lovely. It's so much fun to play with, and this is really inspiring to me. And also, all the names are like coffee themed and tea themed, so I mean, naturally I love it. Also, the packaging, gorgeous. My only Juvia's Place palette, this is the Tribe palette. I believe this palette is discontinued. I don't know for sure though, but this is one of the prettiest palettes Juvia's Place has ever done. This color story is really unique and pretty. Metallics in here are great. However, I think mine is getting quite old because whenever I use these two dark shades in my outer corner, they get kind of patchy, and they didn't used to do that before, so I'm a little bit worried because I don't want to declutter this because it's so pretty, but we're gonna have to wait and see. But it's a pretty palette. Juvia's Place are also a black-owned indie brand, and I remember when they were like the height of indie makeup. However, I feel like there are a lot better matte formulas out there. I mean, their matte formula is good, don't get me wrong, but it's not like my all-time favorite. It used to be, but not anymore. The Nablus Soul Blooming palette. Oh, this used to be a favorite of mine for years. I think this palette actually got me into like kind of softer, more fairy-like makeup because of these duochromes in here. It's more like a fun neutral palette, however, I think this palette is also discontinued, which sucks. I really enjoy this palette. It used to be my all-time favorite in my collection. I don't think it's a favorite anymore, but anytime I used to go traveling, not like we're doing that anytime soon, but anytime I went traveling, this would always come with me. So this one has got some fond memories attached to it, and every time I open it, I just feel really happy. I gotta whip this one out again. It's a lovely little palette. I forgot to mention my Sugarpill Pro palette. I don't know whether to classify this as single shadows or as a pre-made palette. Most of the time I consider this as like a mix of both because I never really like to take the eyeshadows out of this one. This one is messy, I gotta warn you. It is a messy bitch. But I kind of love the way that my palette looks when it's super messy because this is such a fun palette to work with. These were some of my first colourful eyeshadows in my collection and they still hold up over time. They did reformulate Love Plus and I'm tempted to purchase the new formulation because it seems to be a lot more creamy and smooth. This one is quite dry and does need building. I love using these 4 shades as blush. I still do need to fill up this palette, but Sugarpill recently left Beauty Bay, so I don't really want to pay customs for some Sugarpill shadows, I'm gonna be honest. Anytime that I need to reach for a staple matte rainbow color, I open this palette and go for it. It is such an old reliable to me. I don't think I'll ever declutter this or get rid of it. I feel like by the time it gets so old where I shouldn't be using it on my eyes, I will probably put this up for display because I'm just mad like that. This next palette is one that you can kind of consider a singles palette, kind of not really. This is the Lethal After Dark palette. I personally like to consider this as a— oh shit, I forgot to put in the— I took out 2 of the shades to put in a singles palette. Hang on, let me grab those. The good thing about Lethal Shadows is that you can buy them individually if you don't like them as a pre-made palette, but I loved the look of After Dark, so I like to keep it together. This again is one of my top favorite palettes in my collection. Lethal's matte formula is unmatched. It's just fucking incredible. The metallics in here are the best metallics Lethal has done. They're so sparkly and duochromy and high shine. I always have the best time playing with this palette. I just love Lethal a lot. Like their eyeshadow formula, one of my favorites in my collection. This next palette is the newest palette in my collection. This is the Glaminatrix You Beauty palette. Glaminatrix did send this to me in PR, and I've only used it once for my first impressions video, but I am working on a 3 looks 1 palette plus review with this one. That one should be going out later this week. It's an Australia themed palette. The names are all Aussie slang. I'm half Australian. This palette just speaks to my soul. There's some multi-chromes in this palette. You can see when I move the palette in the light. It's so fucking beautiful. I can see this getting in the top 5 of my favorite palettes in my collection. I've only used it once, but I can see that happening. The matte formula is very beautiful. The shimmers in here stunning, especially those multi-chromes. Okay, we only have a few palettes left, and I saved these ones for last because I own the most amount of palettes from Odins Eye and Kaleidos. So let's start off with Odins Eye. The first one being the Odins Eye Solmon palette. Odins Eye's packaging is probably my favorite. I mean, look at how stunning that is. It looks like this. It's basically a warm neutral palette with a pop of purple. I love this duochrome right here. It's so damn pretty. The lilac is really gorgeous. I love the mustard as well. This is a really fun palette to me. I enjoy working with this one. It's not often that I get inspired when I look at a neutral palette, but this is one of the few ones in my collection where I'm like, yes, this is so much fun and I really want to reach for this. Like, I do have a good amount of neutrals in my collection, but this one is one of my favorite neutral palettes. I'm gonna go in order of release from Odins Eye. The next one is the Elve palette, the original one. This is a rosy neutral palette with a pop of yellow and purple. I mainly bought this palette for the metallics because these metallics are so foiled and wet looking on the lids. I will say the matte formula in this palette, while there's not that many of them, this matte formula feels different to the other Odins Eye mattes I've tried. These feel a lot more sheer and less pigmented, and while they can layer on top of each other, they don't layer all that well, so you can't really get much depth with this palette. I do love the metallics in here, and I'm glad that most of this palette is metallic, but it's not the best Odins Eye palette. I feel like out of all of the palettes that I've tried from Odins Eye, this is the one where I'm like, you don't really need it. Next is the Elve 2 palette. God, y'all know if you're not new to my channel, this is my favorite palette in my collection. Like, this is number 1. This color story is so me. It's so bright and colorful, but also pastel. I love the mattes in here. There are a couple of satins, which I'm not a big fan of, and there are 2 pressed glitters, which I just wish they weren't in this palette. Every time I show this palette, I always mention how much I hate the pressed glitters because they're not eye safe. I don't like using them on my eyes. But this palette, I fucking love it so much that I look past the pressed glitters. Every time I look at this, I get really fucking happy and inspired. I feel like if I ever came out with a palette, it would look something like this. It's such a fucking stunner. I love this palette with my entire being. I've got 3 mini palettes from Odins Eye. The first one being the Mini Ocean palette. Love the metallics in here. I have done a 3 looks 3 palettes video on all of these minis. This one is my least favorite of the mini palettes. I feel like this is actually my least favorite Odins Eye palette in general. I love these metallics and this matte shade right here, but the other shades, not a big fan of, but I do like to keep it because these metallics are just so beautiful. Then we have the Mini Skye palette, which, I mean, it's called Mini Skye. Naturally, I was drawn to it. And also, since this is like warm pinks and purples with a pop of copper, it's a very pretty color scheme. I really like the copper shade as well. And this dark brown is very deep and rich. This is such a solid little palette and very inspiring to look at. However, my favorite one, I think this one along with the Elve 2 are my favorite Odins Eye palettes. This is the Mini Forest. My god, I love this. I love pairing turquoise and brown together. Anytime I'm doing a neutral look and I want it to be a bit more fun, turquoise and brown just work so fucking good together, and these greens paired in this palette, so beautiful. This is a very well-rounded palette. I really enjoy this one. I feel like a lot of people can get down with this, whether you like neutrals or color. This is such a solid one. And the final brand we have to talk about is Kaleidos. I love Kaleidos. They're such a beautiful brand in every way. I have 4 of their Futurism palettes right here, so let's go in order. The first one is Futurism 3 Astro Pink. This was a birthday gift from my friend Katie, and this palette is absolutely beautiful. I wish that they replaced this light brownie beige with a different color because it's a bit redundant next to the other mauve. These 2 shimmers are so bright and wet looking. I mean, this... look at that. That is chrome. I just can't get over it. That is stupidly bright. It's like a lilac silver color. This palette is one of the newer palettes in my collection, so I haven't used it as much as I should, but this is a gorgeous little palette. If you like berries and pinks with a pop of blue, this is the palette for you. Such a solid one. I really like it. And the formula is very consistent with other Kaleidos formulas. Next is Futurism 5 Electro Turquoise, or as I like to call it, my Baked Beans palette. This color story reminds me of Heinz baked beans, and I fucking love beans, okay? And I have hit pan in this shade right here. These pans from Kaleidos in the Futurism palettes, they're very deep. I mean, I don't know if you can tell. This took me a long time to hit pan in. This color story is so unique and gorgeous. I love the pop of orange in here, and these metallics are what made me fall in love with Kaleidos. I mean, Tron right here, a beauty. I know I shouldn't really be swatching in this video, but I mean, I can't help it. Kaleidos makes my favorite metallic formula in any palette. If Kaleidos ever came out with single shadows, I mean, fuck me up, I would buy them all. Now, the next 2 Futurism palettes were sent to me in PR. This is the Futurism 6 Lunar Lavender palette. Now, in my review video, I mentioned that this is not my favorite Kaleidos palette. I feel like the formula on this one and Sashimi City are a bit different. This one being the worst one, in my opinion. Especially this shade, it does not build on itself well. It turns patchy so fast. And I feel like when you take away that shade, it makes the palette look less purple. This shade is so light, it barely shows up on me, and I am pretty light. The browns are decent. I mean, they're browns. What can go wrong there? And these metallics are beautiful. I really like Moonroof right here. It is pretty, but like, it's still a bit dull. I don't know if you can really... Okay, on camera it looks a lot better than it does in real life. It's just not as bright as the other ones. You know what I mean? When they sneak peeked this palette, I was the most excited for this one, but it did let me down quite a lot. However, Futurism 7 Sashimi City really fucking surprised me with how much I love this palette. These 2 shades right here are duochromes, and they are fucking incredible. I gotta swatch them, I'm sorry. I have to. So that is Penthouse right there, and then this is Pink Ginger, I believe. So high shine and stunning. I really love that there's a mustard in here and a salmony pink. This is just such a fun, interesting neutral palette. If you like neutrals and you want to like kind of dip your toes into something a bit more fun, this is such a good palette for you. This is, oh, I love this so much. I didn't expect to love it as much as I do, but it's one of my favorite palettes in my collection. Now the final palettes from Kaleidos, this is the Escape Pod palette. This one was also sent to me in PR. I went through an emotional roller coaster with this palette because initially I was in love with the color story and I really love these metallics. I mean, this palette is half matte, half metallic. And these Kaleidos metallics, I mean, you already know how much I fucking love them. But then this blue just gave me such a hard time. These 2 shades basically look the same on the lids. You don't need any creamy beiges, and this pink stains, but I started to grow to like it. Like, I went through a phase where I really liked it, then I was like, this is a bit shit, to I really like it again. Purples in this palette are far superior to the Lunar Lavender palette. I feel like if you wanted purples from Kaleidos, go for this palette instead, because the purples in here are fantastic. I feel like if these 4 shades were different, I would love this palette even more, but I still really enjoy this palette. It's very fun and unique in my collection. And the final palette we're going to be talking about is definitely the best palette Kaleidos has ever done. I'm pissed off that it was limited edition, and it's again one of my favorite palettes in my collection, the Club Nebula palette that they did in collaboration with Angelica Nyqvist. Bitch, this color story is everything. It's bright, it's grungy, there's beautiful high shine metallics, iridescence. These ones don't have much of a base color to them, but I love that. These peachy colors especially are like my everything. This green, fucking incredible. These deep shades are some of the best darker, colourful shadows in my collection. All around, this is such a fucking solid palette, and I feel like it's a damn shame that this was limited edition because it's so good. I've done a lot of videos with this palette and it still stands true as one of my favourite palettes in my collection. I did purchase this one myself. And with all of that said and done, that is it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I am really tired. I've been recording for over an hour now. Do let me know what are some of your favourite palettes in your collection, and like I mentioned, if there are any videos that you'd like to see me do with any of these palettes, then do let me know in the comments down below so I can add that to my filming list. If you'd like to see more makeup content from me, then follow me on my Instagram. It's beautyybyskye right here. I post all of my looks there and I'm active on there every single day. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I would love to have you here, and as always, stay safe, wash your hands, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!